Welcome to John Jay. On behalf of our president, Carol V. Mason, and the entire John Jay community, it is my privilege to welcome you here to Breaking Cycles of Harm, addressing the intersection of community and intimate partner violence. My name is Erica Bond. I'm the Vice President of Justice Initiatives here at the college, and I have the honor of leading our Future of Public Safety initiative. I want to begin by thanking each of you for being here. Looking around this room, I see leaders from around the city, folks from city government, from law enforcement, from the courts, community-based organizations, service providers. We have researchers, advocates, and survivors all here in the room. And the fact that you've all given us 4 hours of your time in the middle of a busy Monday, I think says something really important about the urgency and the possibility of the work that we are all gathered here to discuss. So today's convening is hosted by John Jay's Future of Public Safety initiative, together with our National Network for Safe Communities. The Future of Public Safety initiative was launched by President Mason to help communities reshape safety policy, programs, and budgets in ways that are evidence-based, community-centered, and grounded in dignity. And the National Network for Safe Communities, which is housed here at John Jay as well, is an internationally recognized research center based at the college that has spent more than 2 decades developing and implementing proven, life-saving violence reduction strategies in dozens of cities across the country and, in fact, around the world. And by bringing these 2 bodies of work together at this moment in this city, it's exactly the kind of conversation that John Jay is built to host. Before I go any further, I really need to extend deep gratitude to Councilmember Gail A. Brewer and the New York City Council's Domestic Violence Empowerment, or DOVE, initiative. Their generous support is what makes today possible, and more importantly, it reflects a sustained commitment from the Council to ensure that survivors and the organizations who serve them have the resources that they need. So Councilmember Brewer and the members of her team who are here with us today, thank you so much for your support. So when we talk about public safety in New York City, we tend to treat intimate partner violence and community violence as 2 distinct problems, with different sets of experts, different funding streams, and 2 different theories of change. But research, practice, and lived experience all tell us a very different story. These forms of violence, as I think many of you in this room are well aware, share root causes: structural inequity, exposure to trauma, social isolation, and harmful norms around power and control. They share many of the same families, the same blocks, and too often the same victims. Let's consider the scale for a moment. Here in New York City, the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence has shared that NYPD reports roughly 250,000 domestic incidents annually. And intimate partner homicide remains a significant driver of premature death for women citywide. At the same time, NYPD recorded more than 1,000 shootings last year. So the National Network for Safe Communities conducted an analysis of 43 communities and found that roughly 5% of community violence incidents are connected to domestic violence, and 25% of domestic violence incidents involve someone engaged in violence in the community. And my guess is that is probably a bit of an undercount. I see Sasha nodding over there. So what this data highlights is that these are not parallel problems. They're part of the same ecosystem of harm, and therefore they require an integrated response. When we treat intimate partner violence as a private matter and community violence as a public one, we end up with fragmented policies, siloed funding, and incomplete solutions. We miss opportunities to intervene early, to protect the people at highest risk, and to interrupt cycles that move across generations and across neighborhoods. Bringing these conversations into the same room is how we begin to change that, and that's really what we're here to do today. New York City, as you know, is fortunate. We have an extraordinary ecosystem of public agencies, community-based organizations, hospitals, faith institutions, researchers, and advocates working every single day to break these cycles of violence. I would venture to guess that few cities have anything close to it. But anyone who works in this space also knows the truth. A strong ecosystem is not the same as a coordinated one, and too often the people that are doing this work are operating in parallel rather than in partnership. Strained by capacity, by funding, by data systems that don't necessarily speak to one another, and by the simple fact that there is really just more need than there are hours in the day. And that's the gap that we're here really trying to close. So we've got 3 purposes today. First, we want to learn together. from one another, from national experts, and from the people closest to the harm. Second, we'd love to inspire greater collaboration across the agencies and organizations in this room so that the connections that we build today translate into work in the community tomorrow. And third, we'd like to find concrete ways to drive violence down across the city, and to do so with particular attention to the communities that are disproportionately impacted and that often, as you know, have the least access to services. For example, we know that Black women are particularly at risk. They are 2.5 times more likely than members of other racial and ethnic groups to be domestic violence homicide victims. We also know that LGBTQ+ people are not immune from intimate partner violence. The data is not as strong as it should be, but we did find one US study that stated that 43% of LGBT youth reported being survivors of physical dating violence, and that's compared to 29% of heterosexual youth. And finally, we have to pay special attention to our immigrant neighbors who too often face additional barriers. Language, immigration status, understandable fear of government institutions that keep them from reaching the help that is technically available to them. If our solutions are not reaching all communities, they are incomplete. So let me briefly preview what's ahead. We've designed today to be a progression from research to practice in the field, to lived experience, to lessons from 2 cities that have built and are building more integrated systems, including this one. So we'll open with a research panel from the National Network for Safe Communities, Alexis Acevedo, a senior research advisor, and Fatma Zahra, who's the director of Intimate Partner Violence Strategies at NNSC, will talk about what NNSC has learned about the overlap between intimate partner and community violence. Our second panel is moderated by Anthony Smith, Executive Director of Cities United, a great partner of the college, and that panel will bring together leaders in the field. Sasha Cotton, who's the Executive Director of the National Network for Safe Communities, Dr. Monique Williams, who we're grateful to have here, the CEO of Cure Violence Global, and Daniela Gilbert, who's the recently appointed Senior Advisor to the New York City Deputy Mayor for Community Safety. Together, they will explore what it takes to move beyond crisis response and towards the long-term cultural shifts that disrupt violence at its roots. Over lunch, my lovely colleague Rebecca Atkinson, who directs programs and partnerships for our Future of Public Safety initiative, will moderate a fireside chat with Devin Dean of the Center for Justice Innovation and 2 leaders from the RISE Survivors Board, Shivanezia Kennedy and Nyaja West. And then we're going to close with a panel moderated by Fatma Zahra that will feature Carolyn Betances, RISE Program Director at the Center for Justice Innovation, Reverend Cornell Jones, Assistant Public Safety Director for the City of Pittsburgh, and Ashley Woolheater, the Intimate Partner Violence Program Manager at the Allegheny County Department of Human Services. Pittsburgh and New York have each moved from siloed responses to more integrated approach, and there's real learning, I think, to be shared in both directions here. So to every panelist and moderator joining us today, thank you. Thank you for your time, your expertise, your willingness to be in this conversation with us. And a great big thank you to my John Jay team as well. Rebecca Atkinson, who'll be moderating the lunchtime panel, has done a heroic job of pulling this program together. Thank you also to Mindy Bachstein, who's probably still out in the hallway, Executive Director of External Affairs for the college. Mindy has spent so many years, first in the state legislature and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and now at John Jay, advocating for victims of crime. Thank you to my colleagues at NNSC, with whom it's always a pleasure to work, and particularly Sasha Cotton, NSC's talented executive director, and Fatma Zahra, who I think is here somewhere, but I haven't seen yet, who you will also hear from shortly. And finally, I just want to acknowledge all of you, the people in this room, the colleagues you represent who could not be here. You're the ones doing the work. You are the advocates who are picking up the phone in the middle of the night. You are the credible messengers who are walking the block after a shooting. You are the case managers that are helping a family find housing, the clinicians dealing with trauma, the prosecutors and defenders trying to make a deeply flawed system work better, and finally the researchers who ask the hard questions and document the nature of the problem and whether our solutions are actually even working. The work of healing happens not today in convenings like this one, but in the thousands of quieter moments that you create every day across the city and across the country, and we see it and we are very grateful for it. With that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to David Rogers. He's the program officer at the Ford Foundation. David has played a key role in supporting safe and healthy communities investing in the leaders, in the institutions, and the ideas that make work like all of ours possible, and helping to build the cross-sector partnerships that today's convening reflects. We are deeply grateful for David's leadership and for Ford's sustained partnership in this work. Please join me in welcoming David to the podium.
Good morning, wonderful people. I just want to start by thanking so much the Councilmember Brewer, the Dove, John Jay, the National Network for Safe Communities for making this event happen. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to share why I'm so excited about the conversations that we're going to have today. You know, although I support this work recently within the Ford Foundation, I came to this work a long time ago. Back in the early 2000s, on the other side of the country, I was in leadership with a small, scrappy criminal justice reform organization that was largely made up of formerly incarcerated people and family members who had loved ones on the inside. In 2004, we merged with a crime survivor organization called SAFES, Survivors Advocating for an Effective System. For many outside observers, this seemed like an unlikely pairing based on the narratives that victims don't support criminal justice reform. But the membership of both of our organizations realized that our criminal justice system, our criminal legal system, really wasn't serving anyone well. And our respective memberships did not have exclusively different experiences. In fact, many of the people who are incarcerated are also survivors of violence. And at the end of the day, the survivors who are part of our organizations ultimately wanted what happened to us not to happen to other people. And we believed that in order to create that future, we needed to build a system based on prevention, not on punishment. Partnership for Safety and Justice became the name of our new organization, in the belief that we can achieve both safety and justice, and that those two things are integrally linked. We were pioneering a holistic approach to safety, and we were equally proud of our work to end mandatory minimums that automatically threw young people into the adult system, as well as our shared victory doubling state funding for community programs that focus on domestic and sexual violence. We learned that together, we are stronger, and our experiences are not always siloed or separate. To be clear, though, so much of the politics and the narratives around the issues of safety and crime are designed to divide us. It is no coincidence that 10 years earlier, the passage of the 1994 crime bill delivered one of the most significant victories in the country for resourcing work to address gender-based violence, passing VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. But that 1994 crime bill was also legislation that put the policies of mass incarceration and criminalization on steroids. Those politics of division are still something that we must contend with, but I want to celebrate how far we've come and how much we've learned about what really delivers community safety. We are now in a particular moment in the country and here in New York City where we have the potential to take a giant stride forward in how we prevent crime and violence, support victims, and advance the well-being of communities most impacted. Around the country and here in New York City, there is a recognition that community safety is a complicated issue, and our solutions need to focus on more than anything law enforcement does or doesn't do. We need a whole of government approach. And I'm excited for the emergence of the Office of Community Safety here in New York and similar government entities and structures across the country. Our work has so much potential when we take an intersectional approach. And there are plenty of cautionary tales when we don't do that. You may know the story of New Jersey in the 2010s. It emerged as a leader in the country in reducing its incarceration rates, while sadly and simultaneously also becoming the state with one of the worst racial disparities in the criminal legal system. Progress, not progress. A more recent cautionary tale is the country's reduction in the past decade in our reliance on incarceration to advance community safety. That reduction is real, but in respect to women, we have actually seen increases in criminalization and incarceration in the past decade because our so-called solutions have largely lacked an analysis of gender-specific dynamics in the context that women and gender-expansive people experience. Progress, not progress. We all have blind spots and room for growth, but we will not be another cautionary tale. The work to address intimate partner violence and gender-based violence has grown and evolved, while we have also seen real success across the country in reducing gun violence through investments in CVI and other upstream strategies. Both areas of work can benefit from cross-learning and connections, and the Ford Foundation is proud to be supporting the kind of space and conversations that are happening here today. I am deeply optimistic that we can meaningfully reduce future violence together and strengthen our collective work across strategies. And I just want to thank everyone for being here today.
Thank you for those remarks. At this time, I would like to invite our partners at the National Network for Safe Communities, Alexis and Fatma, to speak to the research NNSC has done about this intersection. And as they're coming up, we'll be passing around full bios for our speakers, so you'll have that information for reference.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Alexis Acevedo, and I'm a senior research advisor at the National Network for Safe Community. I'm also a doctorate student at John Jay. So before we dive into the research, I think it's important for us to clearly define what we're talking about when we talk about community violence and intimate partner violence, right? So community violence we can define as serious violence that often involves assaults, shootings that take place in public areas between individuals who may or may not know each other, right? So this is often driven by, network dynamics. It's often involves some form of retaliation, right? It impacts youth at high rates. We all understand that homicide is the leading cause of death for youth and young adults, right? So let's have that definition in mind when we talk about some of this research. And when it comes to intimate partner violence, we're talking about behavior that involves physical, psychological, and or sexual violence between intimate partners, right? Current or former intimate partners. We know that this form of violence disproportionately impacts women of color, and approximately 50% of femicides are IPV related, right? So when we look at this research and when we started looking into sort of this overlap between community violence and intimate partner violence, it was hard to begin that literature review because there isn't a whole lot of formal literature on this overlap, right? So we had to pull literature from different pieces, right? So what does the literature say? Research broadly suggests that community violence and intimate partner violence share many of the same risk factors, including conflicts within the family, associating with delinquent friends, and lacking the skills to cope with different forms of problems, right? So these factors range from the individual level to the societal level, right? We also understand that engaging in one form of violence increases the odds of engaging in other forms of violence, right? So this is some of the overlap that practitioners have seen, throughout their experience, right? A key point in the overlap between community violence and intimate partner violence is that the relationship itself can be the origin of violence, right? We know that there is an increased risk for dating and relationship abuse that can be tied back to the rigid social structure within groups, the rigid gender roles, and the background and experiences of many individuals as they've grown up, right? Lastly, the difference in age between individuals can also be a cause for concern, as female members in age disparate relationships are more likely to experience intimate partner violence, and similarly, male members in age disparate relationships are more likely to perpetrate intimate partner violence. So while community violence and intimate partner violence do represent different forms of violence, they share many of the same origins, which makes us think that there might be some solutions that we can employ to address both forms of violence. So, as I said, we need to pull from different parts of the formal literature, right? So, given that, so next I looked at sort of related literature. It's debatable whether it's related or not, but I think it is. So we know that individuals who engage in partner abuse also engage in violence against others, right? So here, again, we see this overlap between different forms of violence, which is very important. This body of literature also tells us that group members and affiliates have a broader range of victims, and sometimes this includes intimate partners compared to generally violent men or men who don't necessarily just specialize in intimate partner violence, right? So, related to that, they're also more likely to carry weapons and, be worried about being victims themselves, right? And we'll highlight why this point is important in the next couple of slides. The literature also suggests that generally violent men are more responsive to conventional treatment compared to those who only engage in family violence. But this literature also suggests the opposite, right? So broadly, we can say that how we choose to address the overlap may have to look different from traditional responses, right? So as we begin to understand and study this overlap, we think, we should think about related literatures and what they can teach us about the overlap between community violence and intimate partner violence. So next we'll look at some research from Chicago. Research on the connection between domestic violence and intimate partner violence and community violence reveal important red flag relationship factors, right? These include, a person who is involved in a position of influence in a group or gang, a relationship that involves our current or former partner involved in this retaliatory group dynamic, and a relationship where intimate partner violence is either present or threatened, right? So these are important flags for instances where there might be some abuse within intimate partners. So a broader analysis from Chicago reviewed almost 2,000 conflicts mediated by ceasefire in Chicago between 2000 and 2015. And they find that approximately 7% of conflicts were domestic in nature, and then of that 7%, over half involved intimate partner violence, right? So we know just based on that finding that practitioners doing this work in the community are seeing this overlap. And one of the patterns that is really highlighted in that piece is that DV, and more specifically intimate partner violence, often spurs on community violence, so it can often lead and spiral into broader conflicts within the community. So next, I decided to look at national data, right? What can we learn from national data? More specifically, a national incident-based reporting system. That data is massive, right? And its availability is hit or miss sometimes, right? So I had to really limit this analysis to 2022 and 2023. I coded, intimate partner violence, or what we can call a variable called intimate partner violence, through the relationship field, because these reports often include a lot of information about a specific incident, and one of those is what the relationship is between victims and offenders or people that have been arrested for that incident, right? So I coded that to create an IPV variable, and then I wanted to look at, well, what could a proxy look like for community violence, right? Acknowledging the fact that in NIBR's data, they really don't track what we would call group violence or community violence, but there are proxies that we could use. And I used, any time there was a gang indicator within the data, anytime there was, drug-related activity indicators within that data, and then the presence of 2 or more offenders in an incident. As sort of a proxy measure, not a great one, but it's the best we could do with this national data, right? So for those 2 years, IPV-related incidents accounted for an average of 13% of all incidents, right? And this the data set includes offenses ranging from homicide and assault all the way down to weapons and drug offenses, right? So approximately 13% of an average of 13% of the incidents in those 2 years can be, related, or we think might be related to intimate partner violence, right, through that relationship field. And then an average of 9% of incidents indicated some possible group involvement, or this proxy measure that I used. And the overlap between the two, right, because we're trying to understand what is the scale of this overlap using the national data. Well, that was around 3%, right? Again, this data, difficult to work with, not necessarily the most reliable, but it is a national indicator of some of this overlap that we're talking about today, right? In 2022 and 2023, that national data, covers approximately 80% of the country, which is a large portion of the country, right? So this gives us some idea. But we have even more specific data that we use at the national network. In our work at NNSC, we perform what we call a problem analysis, where we review homicides and non-fatal shootings in a city, and we work with to produce a report, right? So we wanted to understand how IPV shows up in those homicides and non-fatal shootings that we review with cities across the country. And based, as was mentioned earlier, based on this work, we find that IPV-related incidents make up an average of 9% of all shooting and homicides incidents that we've reviewed historically at the national network. Again, this coincides very closely to that 13% on the national scale. So it seems like it's pointing to a broader pattern, even though we can't be definitive about that pattern yet, right? The other question that we had is, how much, what does the scale of community violence look like, right? So an average of 48% of incidents in these same sites were group related, right? So we understand, at least from the national network's perspective, that a large portion of the violence that we see in the sites that we work in, are driven by groups, by these oftentimes less than formal networks, right? And the next question I had is, what is the actual overlap between the two, right? If we understand, what intimate partner violence looks like, and we understand what community violence looks like, what can that overlap look like? And this was also mentioned earlier. So IPV-related incidents comprise an average of 25% of all non-group related incidents, right? So when we look at violence that does not involve groups, IPV makes a significant portion of those incidents across the country, right? An average of 5% of group-related incidents involved an IPV dynamic, right? So, and then here's the key, right? An average of 25% of IPV-related incidents involve group members, right? So 1 in 4 IPV-related incidents involve an individual that has some link to community violence, right? And that really was an important takeaway for us, right? Because it means that, there's an opportunity to continue to dig into this overlap and to find ways to address what specifically we're looking at. So broadly, what does the literature suggest? It suggests that IPV and community violence share a lot of the same risk factors across different levels. It suggests that some people who engage in IPV also engage in broader violence against others. We know that group, firearm, and relationship dynamics connect intimate partner violence and community violence. We understand that, available data suggests that there is an overlap, but there are important limitations to that data, right? So this is kind of an ongoing part of the problem to look into. And then we also know that prevention efforts, because these two have been treated as silos, may risk important risks. And, if we continue to treat these problems as completely separate, right? So I'll turn it over to Fatma to sort of talk about what we've done since this point.
So what my colleague Alexis laid out was, I'm so used to an attached mic, apologies. What my colleague Alexis laid out is so important, especially the problem analysis data that he synthesized. It gives us a real picture of how community violence impacts intimate partner violence, and also how intimate partner violence impacts community violence. This was really incredible and helpful, and has also informed the qualitative research that we've been doing. Part of the qualitative work that we've been doing is issuing a white paper on the intersection of community violence and intimate partner violence. The National Network for Safe Communities actually released this in 2024, and Alexis's data helped anchor this white paper in understanding the dynamics. In addition to the data that was just shared, we also talked about what are the commonalities between these two serious forms of violence, as well as how do they actually overlap and intersect with each other. This white paper was an opportunity for the National Network for Safe Communities to really help both violence prevention fields, the intimate partner violence field, as well as the community violence prevention field, understand that people that fall under this intersection of violence are high risk, and if not just high risk, but extreme risk. They're extreme risk of experiencing serious injury or death. And when we talk about high risk or extreme risk, we're not just talking about intimate partner violence victims. We're also talking about the individuals that are causing the harm as well. So again, it lays out the dynamics of what happens when these two forms of violence intersect, but it was also an opportunity to mobilize these two fields to talk to one another. How are we actually mobilizing and being strategic about our resources, our coordination, as well as maybe thinking about a new distinct approach in addressing this violence dynamic? So the data that Alexis shared was really helpful, but it's also limited. It's limited in the sense that we're looking at homicides and non-fatal shooting data, which is important, but for those of you in the intimate partner violence field, you understand that there's so much more that happens outside of homicides and non-fatal shootings. We had an opportunity to broaden the research and understanding of what this intersection of violence actually looks like. We proposed doing
focus groups with our site in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. So Allegheny County, Pennsylvania has a population of over 1 million people, and it includes the city of Pittsburgh, and you'll all get to hear from them shortly. So in Allegheny County, the National Network for Safe Communities has had the opportunity to support them since 2022 in implementing a strategy, a focused deterrent strategy to address intimate partner violence. In supporting them in this work, the partners in Allegheny County understood that there was a real problem with this intersection of community violence and intimate partner violence. They were both aware of it and motivated to do something to address this nexus of violence. So we proposed holding 2 distinct focus groups. One focus group for victim survivors who had some connections with community violence, and another focus group with violence interrupters working in the community violence field, but also seeing intimate partner violence show up in their work. So we went through this process with the Institution Review Board here at John Jay to get IRB approval because we wanted to make sure any research that we're doing, which with people, it's not only physically safe, mentally safe, but emotionally safe for them as well. We received IRB approval to run 2 focus groups in Allegheny County. We're just back from Allegheny County, so Alexis and I are still processing the information and findings from there, but we did want to share a few preliminary items. So, with working with victim survivors and conducting a focus group, we went through a process of speaking with different victim service agencies in Allegheny County. We talked to victim advocates, laid out the scope of the research project. We explained, which IPV population we were hoping to speak with and connect with. We identified, safety parameters, not referring clients who might be in crisis mode or high risk of participating in the focus group, and also laid out that we were offering compensation for victim survivors in participating in the research. So we took these steps working with these different victim service agencies because, again, our history with Allegheny County and the agencies was pretty strong. And what ended up happening is that we had 3 respondents for the pre-screening for the focus group. For those 3 individuals, what was really interesting is everybody was comfortable naming that they had experienced intimate partner violence and easily and readily came to that recognition. What was challenging was naming if community violence was involved. And what happened with the 3 respondents, one person said that, this intersection of violence did not apply to them. Another person hesitatingly acknowledged that this violence was happening, but didn't really want to talk about their abusive partner and their community violence ties. And there was a 3rd respondent who, again, was hesitant in identifying the community violence aspect piece, but met criteria for the focus group and agreed to participate, but unfortunately did not show up for the actual meeting. So we didn't have anyone show up for the focus group for victim survivors. And even though that occurred, it was still telling of, this reluctance, this hesitance in identifying community violence. Is it a safety issue? Is it a terminology issue? One survivor mentioned, they don't want to talk about that stuff. They don't want to talk about what their IPV abusive partner has been involved in. Again, readily willing to talk about the intimate partner violence, but not necessarily other activities that the person who caused harm was involved in. It was much different for the work that we did with violence interrupters. We actually had 10 people that reached out for the focus group. We screened them all. They all met the criteria. 8 people actually ended up participating in this focus group. And it was a really incredible, powerful experience. All of the participants, all of the violence interrupters named that, intimate partner violence isn't just something that comes up in their work. intimate partner violence is something that they had been personally impacted by. They were personally impacted by it by either experiencing it, witnessing it as a child, or seeing and having loved ones who've passed because of intimate partner violence. So this was a deeply personal thing and not just a professional issue that was coming up for them. They also, I want to point out, they were also incredibly well versed on what intimate partner violence was. They knew what to look out for, they knew how it occurred, they understood the dynamics. And what they shared with us in this focus group is that, they see this happen quite frequently. Some even noting that intimate partner violence happens almost every other day. They also noted a trend, which I think was interesting and important to name, the use of more violence by women. What they shared with us was they've encountered a number of women who were experiencing intimate partner violence and were, quote unquote, fed up by the abuse and not being able to access the resources and help they needed to mitigate the violence. So what ended up happening with these women is that what they shared with us is they were connected to a number of shooting incidents taking place. Shooting incidents to stop the intimate partner violence. Another way they noted the use of violence by women was seeing this trend of intimate partner violence happening with same-sex relationships with women and not knowing how to support that specific population. The violence interrupters felt, they needed more training, they needed more understanding and support from the LGBTQI agencies in the community to address this piece. Importantly, they also shared that they felt strongly that intimate partner violence actually impacts community violence. In this age of social media, they shared that, IPV results in pistols. So it leaves you to wonder, what are we doing? Why are we addressing just one form of violence and not two forms of violence? They also noted that they understood an important step in being able to address intimate partner violence was de-escalating the person that was causing the harm. Now, the person that was causing the harm, number of services are needed for them, but there were challenges in them accessing it. One being the social stigma around breaking up and not being in a relationship. Another being masculinity issues around being asked not to have contact with the victim survivor if there's a restraining order. And then finally, it was a basic necessities issue. You're asking this person to stop the violence and leave, but they have nowhere to go. Whether it's temporary, whether it's permanent, housing was not an option, and that's why these cycles of violence continued, because they had to remain in the houses with victim survivors. And finally, from our preliminary findings with the violence interrupters, they were very, very clear that intimate partner violence is challenging and difficult to address. They don't know the solution, but they do want to be part of the solution. And they made it very loud and clear about that. They know their neighborhoods, they know their communities. They wanted to be at the table with victim service advocates. They wanted to be at the table with IPV stakeholders to come up with creative solutions. So not something that just happens to them, but for them to be a part of the whole process. The focus group approach was really eye-opening for both of us. Incredibly informative. We learned so much more about how impacted populations are feeling. It gave us, an understanding of what it looks like and potential solutions as well. And we're hoping in the near future to work with other communities across the country running these focus groups. We want to help build the literature around this intersection of violence. We want to understand, what's happening in Allegheny. Is it different or similar to another city or another community? What are the similarities? What are the differences? And how can we take that information that we learn in focus groups to help tailor certain interventions or messaging going forward? We absolutely have to rethink how we engage victim survivors in focus groups. It's really necessary that we have victim survivors' perspectives. We want all our strategies to be victim survivor informed and centered. So part of what we're thinking about currently is how are we going to help define in a more clear way what community violence is, and something that resonates with victim survivors, and address any safety issues and concerns they have, particularly around confidentiality in participating in a focus group. We also want to better prepare the victim service agencies. We've had a long-standing history, but it seems like, perhaps more interactions, more training and understanding about the intersection would go a long way. So they could also support and understand, the outreaching process for focus groups. But this is also just not about focus groups. It's also about making sure victim survivors understand the risk that they're at, and victim advocates understand that more holistic and nuanced safety planning needs to happen and take place with them. So that's a little bit about our research here at the National Network for Safe Communities. And we are now going to transition into our next panel.